feel free to take them in. All right, well, let's get into it, shall we? I'd like to welcome Justin Phillips and Becky Blosser, the artists that we have for Convergence and Coincidence. My name is Matt Chapman. My wife Nicole and I are the owners of Curio, and really excited to have these two artists here to talk about our exhibition. I mean, there's so much to talk about with it. I love it. I think it's such a stunning exhibition. The two of you together is just a dream. And when people come in and they see the show, they first wonder if you guys are friends, which you are. But then they're like, oh, the work works so great together. Like, were they like working together? Was there conversation with that? And when I tell them that largely the works were made independently and then brought together, and this is the relationships that we found in them, they're like, not good about it. So, I mean, we are too. And getting to spend the majority of 2 months with the show, each time we look at them, we find new things in them in each one, and then we connect them to each of you, and it's endlessly fascinating. So maybe we can start by kind of sharing our thoughts on what it's like to show with one another.
Sure. Well, thank you first for having us for this exhibition, and thank you all for being here tonight with this really crummy weather. So I know this is
it's a rough day.
Yeah, but this really is really wonderful. So thank you for being here, and thank you Nicole and Becky. So I mean, in my experience, I spoke to Matt and Nicole probably about mid-spring last year about exhibiting, and we sat down and talked about the opportunity of showing work here, and Matt's like, what do you think about showing with Becky? And I was like, yeah, for sure. And so we all met as a group, and just started talking about work. We both brought in a portfolio of pieces and just started talking about stuff that we were working on, things that we were thinking about. But when we brought the work here, fast forwarding to when we installed it, it was just kind of, there was no preconceived ideas about how we, what, colors or shapes, or not shapes, but sizes, things like that. It was all just kind of, we lined it up, and it was just kind of mind-blowing how much of it was just an exciting moment, seeing all the work together, and seeing these conversations, the potentials for conversations among the work. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've known Justin's work for a long time, but I have not seen an exhibition, I don't think, like a large grouping of your work. So seeing it all together, like I've always felt that our work was sort of process driven in one way or another, but in very different ways. But I love seeing the progressions that appear in Justin's work from one piece to the next. That's something I think about in my work. But it's completely different, and I think those differences, seeing the work together, it sort of, you see the similarities and the differences, and then they relate even more, and then you kind of see other things that, other progressions of things, and I love how quiet Justin's work is on one level, but then how like saturated the colors appear in relation to everything else on the wall. I just think it's like, there's something that's so wonderful about the way it all works together, so.
Yeah. I really think the only thing we told you when prepping for the show was bring a healthy amount of work.
Yeah, and I didn't think it was gonna be this like closely connected. I was shocked to see our colors are the same, and that really kind of blew my mind. And like, it's just not something we planned at all. And it makes me think about color, and I want to like research like I just want to research that more. Like, why am I focusing? Like, why are we focusing on these same colors?
I
Yeah,
remember
those blues.
I remember
Yeah.
at one point, I kind of felt like we were artists sharing the same studio, but I was working on one side. You know how if you share a space with somebody and there's like this like-mindedness, and it was just these strange coincidental kind of moments in the work, but the colors just kind of seemed to just really mend well together or blend.
Yeah.
And the title of the show came about through a conversation, and I think the word coincidence came up. Didn't really make sense to me until I saw the show, and it's like, wow, there are a lot of coincidences
That was
here.
cool.
Like-
Coincidentally, I felt the same way.
Like, wow, coincidence is really appropriate.
And so talking about naming the exhibition, I guess Nicole and I had a little bit more insight than perhaps both of you did. And like we always, the titles for our exhibitions usually come out of a conversation we have on our first meeting. Like we meet here in the space and we talk about, you know, what each artist is really trying to go for and what we want to do in the space. If it's a single artist, it's usually just kind of something that, well, it doesn't even matter if it's a single artist. It usually happens when somebody at the table just says something that's like, yeah, that's it. And I'll just make a quick little note of it, and then I kind of rest on it and think about it a little while. But we went back and forth over a couple different exhibition titles for this one, and coincidence came about when we actually started to see both of your works, because we always, like, being the curators, we see, like, Justin will submit a couple images, Becky submits a couple of images, and we get to see them, we're like, oh, yeah, there's a lot going on here. So that's where coincidence came from. And convergence, I mean, this is truly, you know, as the show's copy kind of talks about, it's a point where the two of you meet, both physically in this space, but I think even conceptually through your work. Like there are moments where you guys are really touching on the same spot, and then like you'll each continue on your own way. And maybe that means you kind of like walk side by side for a little while before splitting off on your ways, or it's just like a quick meeting, you say hi and you're off on your way again, like so to speak, through the work. But it's gorgeous to see. And you know, you're talking about like the colors. How did we land on the colors? This the piece behind you, Becky, that you have, that green, it's in Justin's drawings. And then the blue, like how you guys found the same blue is staggering. It's almost like you both went into the same shop but just at different times. You're like, oh, this is cool, and you like took it along with you. It's just
Nope, I
wonderful.
mixed that blue.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah, and you both, and you know, Becky, you said that your work is really process heavy, and Justin's is as well. So perhaps there's an opportunity here for us to kind of get into that a little bit for each of you and talk to us about what your process looks like.
Well, I mean, my process, I think, you know, I work with printmaking and drawing a lot, so there's a lot of process with that, but it is kind of like my drawings and my work, it's sort of process led, I guess, or there's like, I'm not really knowing what I'm aiming for until I get to that point. And I think that's what I mean by process. So it's like asking questions or looking for different combinations and arrangements, or like stepping back and reacting to the work. So these forms kind of like create themselves, and then they create variations of themselves. I obviously have a hand in that, but I'm like always reacting to it. So I'm always in my work looking for opportunities to create that setting that I can react to it and find something new or make a new discovery. Otherwise I end up getting bored. Like I never want to make what I intend to make, because then I'm just like fulfilling another obligation. So like I wanna like find discoveries and just be like have that moment of curiosity. I feel like that's a place I can still have that is in my artwork. So like take those risks and stuff to a certain degree. I mean, we all have our like things that we're struggling to, hurdles to overcome and that kind of stuff. So
I never want to make what I intend to make. Dang, like just, that's awesome.
For me, there's just a lot of just questions, and questions lead to the next batch of questions. And I usually will continue on a process until like the questions stop coming my way. So I'm always in pursuit of more and more questions and kind of more what's the next piece gonna be. There's bits of pieces that, you know, like sequentially, like this one came before the one above, the one on the top over there, which was followed by the one below there. So there's always these like questions like, well, what if I did this, or what if I tried this, or combined this? And then I usually just keep going with things until I kind of exhaust those inquiries. And then, so I'm always looking for the next thing, like the questions. And the work really drives that and kind of generates those for me. And the two different bodies of work are two different processes. So the works on paper are much more about folding paper, dipping that in either diluted paints or inks or dyes, mark making, and finding inspired moments within the color or the textures or the creases, which lead me to my mark making decisions. The other pieces are more about kind of stacking paper on top of paper on top of paper. So there's a lot of condensing of material and mark making and paint along the way. So yeah, I just like to pursue the questions and see where they lead me.
Yeah. And we do the same thing when it comes to installation too. I mean, like, so it was a group effort by like all four of us. We all met and we brought the work out, we kind of laid it down, and you know, Justin, as you said, it's like asking questions. As we move the works around, it's like, okay, so these guys are talking really great now, but maybe these over here aren't being seen as much, and then it's just moving this around, like, well, what does it look like we put it over here, how does it look like we do it over here?
Yeah.
And then as you said, like when those questions stop coming, it usually starts to feel like you've found a really great way into hanging the work. We even tried to hang it in a way that it mirrored the actions that were happening in the works. You know, like we kind of have like hills and grids, lines. There's a fluid movement to it, which Becky, that we find so much in your work. The linear moments, the more grid-like pieces come from Justin's works. And I mean, it was really just, it's a pleasure to hang, and it's always a new challenge. And for a curator, for someone putting together work, it's really exciting to get to work with other people's art and then make a piece of your own from it. And I think when you treat it like that, when you treat it as like this is a work of art in itself, it really brings the show together. It highlights it, lifts your work up even more than it does on its own. And questions, you know, just are always a constant when you have people coming in and seeing the work too. Like Becky, people ask all the time, what is dry point etching? And like I have an understanding of it, but not nearly to the depths that you do. So I explain it like, man, that's like magic. So I mean,
I'll take that.
Yeah, could you like kind of show us how it's done for a moment and tell us a little bit about what dry point etching is?
Well, a dry point, and some of my students in here know what dry point is. Dry point is really a form of intaglio, and intaglio is it's like it's any kind of engraving, really. So like engraving onto a plate in different ways. Dry point is just like scratching onto a surface. So it's a really direct, simple, straightforward way of working with intaglio printmaking. So you, this was just done on a piece of plastic, and you scratch into the surface, create the drawing, then you scrape ink over it, scrape the ink off of it, kind of buff it in different ways, and then you run it through press. So it's kind of like an involved process. Dry point tends to be a lot more fragile than other etching processes, so like the plate won't last very long, which is something I like grapple with. Like I want that permanence, but then like that impermanence kind of relates conceptually to some of the other things I'm doing, and the fact that it's plastic kind of relates conceptually to some of the stuff I'm doing, so I kind of like think about it that way. So I mean that's pretty much what dry point is, and it has like this really fuzzy line that it'll create like an etching. Traditionally etching is done by dipping like a metal plate into an acid bath, and the acid eats it away, and there's different like grounds and stuff that you use. But so you get a really crisp line with a normal, with like a traditional etching. With dry point, you get kind of like a fuzzy line. And so that's, if you look really close, and there's just different ways to scratch. It might be like a little bit more contrasted, I guess, and you can only get like a couple of prints until it starts to fade away. So
I love that you connect the materials that you're using to the conceptual qualities in your work. As people kind of come through the gallery, they either, like if they're with another person, like it's nice to kind of be a fly on the wall and like hear like, you hear them chatting about like what the work is doing for them. Or if you're the only person, if they're the only person in the gallery, and they'll talk to us, and they'll be, and like so many people will be like, is this kind of like, is this artist really interested in like architecture, but kind of how architecture surrounds nature, or like the idea that nature always kind of gets out? And like I like that you're connecting the materials that you're using, the impermanence of the material, to what's happening in the work, because when you look at the work, it has this understanding of like a built structure which is supposed to last, but it all looks really precarious, and things are escaping, or have fallen over, but like somehow found their final rest. And I kind of like that, just as the structures in your pieces aren't totally meant to last, the materials themselves aren't meant to last.
right, yeah, I think about that a lot, and it's something I just struggle with, or just always am thinking about. It's like being a consumer and.
Well, we're in a world of things, right? Like we're always making more things, and as artists, we make a lot of work. And then I also remember struggling with the idea, like, if I keep making stuff, am I just making more things to occupy space? And it's something that you really wrestle with. Yeah, we do.
That's my wife.
Yeah. There's a lot of artists in the room tonight too, so like we all make things, and it's just around, and you're like, oh my god, like part of me loves the minimalist life, but then I can't help but make more things.
Right, like I'm just part of the problem.
But I'll tell you, if like these are the things that we make, and like if these are the things that you continue to make, like I'm happy to have them.
Thank you.
And Justin, the same with yours. Like when I look into your pieces, I don't look at them, I look into them. And again, visitors say the same thing. Like people are like I get lost in them, or I fall into them. They get lost in the surface of it. They talk about topographic maps. They talk about, more than once, Mark Rothko's name has come up when looking at your work. And they asked me, like, is Justin a spiritual guy? I was like, yeah, I think he's spiritual. But can you kind of take us a little bit deeper into like what they do for you? Do you call them drawings? Like, how do you talk about them?
They're the works on paper I would definitely call drawings. They're mixed media. They're wet and dry materials, but they're definitely drawing process. I think a lot about mark making that goes into them. And I consider them meditations and ways for me to kind of relax myself or relax my situation. They're kind of games for me. I find rhythms in there. I look for challenges. I look for opportunities based on, so going back to the idea of dyeing the paper, when I fold these and I dip them, I let them dry folded. So you can see in certain pieces how certain squares or rectangles are more diluted and some are more kind of richer in color. How some you can see kind of like the kind of bubbles of where the paint dried. And so when I open it up, I see opportunities to start making marks based on what's on the paper. And a long time ago, I read this essay by Alan Watts. He's like a British Zen scholar, and he talked about, there was a competition at an art school in Chicago, and they gave everybody these blocks of plaster, and they said create sculptures with them. And the one student didn't know how to really enter this white cube. So she's like contemplating what to do with it, and then she decided to knock it off the pedestal, and it fell on the ground and fractured. So then she said, because of that fracture, she was able to enter it, because there was a line there, there was a mark there that she was able to kind of access something that inspired her and formed the next thing. And I've worked a lot with blank canvases, blank paper, and when you enter that, it's a dive. And sometimes I feel like when you create situations where you allow chance to happen, you make some kind of predetermined ideas, like these are the colors I'm working with. But you allow some chance opportunities in, it'll tell you stuff, it'll inform decisions. And I really embrace that and love that in art making for myself. So a lot of times I'll find something to kind of start the work with, and I'll begin, and I'll see where it leads me. And sometimes things will pop up, there'll be certain rhythms that'll be established in there. And then I'll just kind of go with it, go with the rhythm of it, and see where it takes me. But most of these drawings were done in one sitting. The two-step process would be the dyeing and allowing it to dry, and then the next would be the drawing aspect of it on top. But I do really, I feel honored to be, Rothko would be in the conversation.
In the same sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always, looking back on my art making throughout my life, it's always been about creating contemplative objects and things I believe art's a mirror. So no matter what you look at, it's kind of a reflection on how you feel and think and how you interpret things. You can have a still life painting and 10 people look at it, but they'll have 10 interpretations based on who they are. And I feel that way about the work that I make. And I've always been a huge fan of work that does that for me, that makes me think. And so I like the challenge of making objects like that, making things like that, drawings and paintings.
Yeah. And I like that you kind of relate it to a game.
Yeah.
It's like, I imagine opening up that piece after you dye it and it dried, there's this moment of like anticipation, like what's gonna be under there.
Yeah, for sure.
And then when you see it and you're able to, the work's talking back to you. You're not just imposing your will on it and you say, all right, you're done because you're exactly how I wanted you to be.
Yeah.
To Becky's quote, never make the thing you intend to make. And Becky, you had mentioned earlier how you like to kind of respond to the work as it's being developed.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a convergence between you and Justin there too. So,
For sure,
how does that process play out for you? Like, when do you decide? Like, when do you allow the work to say, I want to go this way, and you go with it, or not? Like, how do you come to that decision?
Well, I'll describe, I might answer your question. But listening to what, Justin talk about his process and everything, it made me think about some of the things I do, some of these more complex pieces. I have these shapes that I've created, and there's sort of like a grouping of 12 different shapes. And those pieces those shapes have gone through different sort of iterations.
Are they physical shapes?
They were physical shapes. They were little models that I made, and then I photographed them, and I drew them, and I traced from the photographs, and then I digitized them. This is over a couple years. And so I have these shapes digitally, and those are screen prints, which digital processes can be really inherent to the process. So I just started compiling them in Illustrator, which is a program it's a vector-based program, and I just would kind of layer them over on top of each other, layer, make it like a big tangle, and then start to deconstruct that, start to pull it out. So it's almost like pick up sticks or something, you know what I mean? It's sort of like a game in a way. It feels meditative but frustrating at times.
Yeah,
It's when it's never gonna
really
end.
The game is terrifying. It's like, oh god, it's like Jenga.
But I don't know, I feel like I come to a point where something is finished when it starts to take shape, or it starts to with my work, it is either being built or collapsing, or in a point between those places, and there's certain movements where that happens more or not, and the work and the process kind of creates that, so then I just kind of follow with like where that movement is going, and it's like a response to the work. So, and that happens in different ways. I think like some of the monoprints that I work on, like the some of the etchings that are kind of next after the screen prints here, the monoprints are sort of created by, it's like I have a plate and then I'll paint on it and run that through the press, and there's a lot of chance it happens with that, and sort of just in one way the work kind of finishes itself, and it's like, okay, it's done. It's like you know, I have to back away, and that's something I always struggled with as a young artist, is like knowing when work is finished. And I think developing or working with these different processes and questions and stuff, it's like you create finished works, but then it's like an ongoing progression of like creating things, because the work feeds itself, and you kind of get these little bubbles that come out and they're finished works, and you keep going.
Yeah. I love that. And, you were talking about how, you know, you build stuff up and it falls apart. Have you ever come across maybe this may be a question for all of us, but like, have you ever come across a completely like dilapidated space, but you couldn't imagine it any other way? Like, I feel like in its perfect form, it's incomplete. It had to fall down to be what it really wanted to be. I think about that when I'm looking into your works. Like, I can imagine if you like took all this stuff and like really shored up the angles and made everything nice and square and level, that it would, you know, have this, you know, really kind of pristine inorganic shape. But I love that they've tumbled. Like, it's almost like you recognize that they have to be that way and only that way. I think that really kind of comes into play the most with this piece right behind us here on the wall. It takes me to a spot when I was a child. Like, growing up in the country, my friends and I had forts all over the place. But there was one where there was just this like knocked down cinder block shed that was long forgotten. And it was just really the foundation with a couple half walls and like a half doorway. But then the rest of it, like the ceiling of it, was all vines and roots and stuff. So like when I look into that, I'm like, man, I think back to that space, and if it was ever a hole, I would never want to see it. Like, I only want to remember it that way. And like I feel like if this was completely, you know, put together, I, you know, maybe wouldn't spend as much time getting lost in it.
Right.
And Justin, I do the same with yours. Like, there's always something to get lost in. You talk about these bubbles on top, you talk about the mark making, the folds, the topography of them. There's so much to take in with each one, and you're working in a relatively small space.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I love that. So like, you know, how does the size come into it? Like, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Well, these are all tabletop drawings and you know, mixed media pieces, and they're definitely, I sit down at the table and I work on them, and I kind of get lost in just the scale of them, and there's slow reads, but they're also slow creations. Like, I really kind of get lost in like the fibers of the paper, or just little kind of intricacies and nuances that exist in there. Yeah, I can't imagine them being any other size. And I really, these drawings, the works on paper, are kind of like my pandemic works. Like I'm continuing to work on them. I'm up to about 37 right now. But they were the works that really kind of was my main focus during the pandemic. And just the other thing that I really like about the size of them is, like I mentioned earlier, they're all pretty much one sitting. Like I sit there and I kind of have an idea of what I'm going to be doing, or color I'm working with, or a particular drawing tool, and I start and I just kind of keep going until it's done. So it's really conducive to that time span, and it's very personal size for me. It's just it just feels right. I
Yeah,
mean, I
and
can't really...
you can do this with it, right? Like you can get right over top of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
it's fascinating that you mentioned this as being your pandemic work. I feel like all of our worlds got so much smaller in that time. And
For sure.
yeah, I mean, truly, like, I mean, we were asked to stay in our homes for long periods of time. So I feel like all of our social worlds got a lot smaller. Like, you know, our physical spaces got a lot smaller. You know, largely, if you weren't afraid, it's just that you shouldn't go out anyway. So I like that. You know, the size of the work kind of came from that too. And like you said, it's tabletop work. Maybe you don't have, you know, the space to spread out, but I just think something about being able to kind of like get your arms around it is really fascinating.
Yeah, I think the intricacy of the mark making wouldn't work on, I mean, it would work in different ways if you had different scale. If you had a larger scale thing, they would read differently. I would use different drawing materials. These just felt right. And also the process of dyeing the paper wasn't like putting it in like a vat. It was folding it up and putting it in these like little like Tupperware containers essentially. And then I would have them just drying on paper or on sheets of plexi.
Did you go through, we allowed to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you
Please,
go through a lot of paper usually? Because I know when I'm drawing,
Yeah.
and it, you know, like there's all these crumpled papers around my feet.
There's definitely ones that I have a stack of that just haven't, like, it didn't speak to me in a way that these did. So like, there was definitely like some that are off the side. And I look at them every so often and I'm like, I actually worked on one over the holidays that was kind of an older piece that I feel pretty good about, but like, I don't know, I definitely have these dyed papers that just didn't lead to anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And could you point out where you've made marks on one? 'Cause I'm almost embarrassed to ask the question.
Oh,
I thought this was just marbleized paper.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's like this is graphite, and if you see it up here, this is this portion, and then these lines.
Oh,
so
I see.
I just draw across,
see.
and
Okay.
I alternate different drawing tools. So these are everything from markers and pens and graphite.
Ah.
Yeah.
I have to remind myself that these were once blank papers, because it just feels surprising, like when I first was looking at them, it was bringing to mind almost office supplies maybe, because of the
Yeah.
scale of the marks, you know,
Sure.
pencil lines or pen lines or different pens or whatever, and then I was thinking, I was like, oh my god, like, I didn't know you dyed them, but I was like, these were blank papers at one point. It's just
Yeah.
incredible. They have that physical presence, and I just wanted to say I actually really like that are they letter size? They're so
9 by 12.
familiar.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah,
they're
very
not
close.
letter size, but when I look at them, they're so familiar. So like a monumental scale work of art,
Yeah.
you know, it feels like a work of art. It feels like it's trying to say something, or it has a presence, whereas this feels like the note you've had folded up in your pocket for months.
Yeah.
You know, like there's an intimacy
Yeah,
there,
absolutely.
which it gives it this secret knowledge, you know?
I might have one on me.
It must be important, you know, so that plays into it. I think that's
there-
powerful.
I appreciate that, and I get that for 100%, and I've thought about that before, and people have told me that they seem like, are they letters to people, or are they, people think of it as, and it definitely references like loose leaf paper with a line.
References, yeah.
But you
that
can work
wasn't
them
the-
horizontally too, right? Like going across. It's like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
Right.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it helps someone who, I mean, I'm someone who's gone to art school, but I think the intimacy and the familiarness might
Mhm.
talk to someone in a way different than say like an
Yeah.
Agus Martin piece that's huge and
Yeah.
maybe playing with some of the same ideas, but it just feels
Mhm.
a lot less intimate or knowable.
Yeah, thank you, sure. Yeah.
I had a question about the etchings. I'm just curious why you would choose etching, which seems like such a long process, rather than, when I first saw that, I thought it was just pen and ink.
Yeah, I don't know, there's something about, like what goes into planning for the etching and.
Because it seems you could do the same thing with digitalizing something and then
This-
using that as a reference to draw it.
Right, yeah, and I've started to work that way a little bit more. There's something with the mark making of etching that I love and that I've just
Okay,
always, like,
that's it.
I'll
Yeah.
stay with. But this was, I wasn't working digitally at all when I was making this. It was all kind of like drawing and collaging and positioning and, yeah, it was very physical. And the plates are oftentimes transparent, so like you can have preliminary drawings and like put under the plate and sort of like work, and but then it's also clear, so the marks you're making are clear, so there's like a disconnect that happens where you don't exactly see what you're doing until you print it. So that is something that I love, and that's that moment of chance where it's like, I think I know what I'm doing, but I don't really know until I print it.
Right.
And I try to create moments like that, so.
And using like celluloid or something?
You can use plexi. I use something that is called PETG, which is really soft, and it's actually the raw version, it's the raw material form of what water bottles are made out of. So, but it's kind of meant more for monotype, like working on the surface than scribing into the surface, but I don't mind that it's that soft and malleable, so.
But there's also like a reference in the process.
Right.
Like okay, so this is one step, this is the next step. There's the physicality of like putting that down, running into the press.
Mm-hmm.
There's the excitement of the reveal, and then there's the kind of interpretation of what it's given you, and then you can decide which way you want to go with it. Is it finished? Is it not?
Yeah.
Maybe like you can almost go back in time a little bit, where it's like, all right, instead of going this path, when I get to step 6, I'll choose to go another direction.
Right, you kind of create a point where you can make lots of different variations, because I have this plate, so I could create many different variations of this. And I have stacks of drawings at home that I've not ever really shown, that are unfinished to me. You know, those stacks of things, and they don't have that like crisp resolve that I find in the work that's here, so.
Do you ever like run a print over one plate and then run it through another plate?
Yeah, those prints back there are multi-plate prints, so they are 2 to 3 plates, and they are photo etching and dry point plates. So they're kind of like, that's another thing with the process, is like there's like a convergence of different types of marks, and I think like I just have an interest in printed things. So like printmaking as a subject matter, it's like you can converge like photographic imagery, painterly imagery, etched, very linear, technical imagery, all in the same layer. So it takes like the same tonal range. So it's a place where like lots of different formal languages can exist and kind of conflict with each other, or create resolution with each other. So that's something that I just love about that as a media, and just thinking about printed stuff in general, so.
Awesome. And Becky, another question for you. You'd made a comment when we were bringing the works in, that piece at the very end, that silk screen. You said it took you 2 years.
Oh, I don't. No, it's these two right there. They took quite a while to create. That's not like 2 solid years. I was being dramatic.
Okay. Well, you said it so quick and so confidently. I'm like, oh, sure.
It's like, you know, it's like life, you know, we have all the different things that we do, so you pick it up and you leave it, and then you pick it up again, you leave it. But definitely like a solid year, like 2020 was the top piece right there for me. That screen print right above Kylie right there. So, but that was like a solid year of just like sitting and finicking with all the shapes and stuff. So.
So the pieces that kind of get rejected, you're both, you know, your process is more up here. I mean, they're tied together with your physical process, but I was curious if the pieces that get rejected are ones that tend to like hook into your negative energy stuff, or if those are ones that you go, yeah, I own it, it's there, I'm done.
I mean, for me, it's just finding inspired moments, and some just it just hits a certain spot. You know that, like, when whether you're making it and it feels like it's working, or you're getting something out of it. And it's not that I always see things as opportunities and learning experiences. I see the ones that aren't necessarily the stronger works, or the ones I'm maybe learning lessons about technique, or and they might, you know, maybe a year or two from now I'll look at them differently. You know, I always change too, so it's, you know, or there could be something like a little gem in that piece that I can come back to later and say, oh, I never really thought about it like this, and that makes sense to me a little bit more now. So
You put it away in the magic closet and it comes
Yeah.
back out later and it's better.
yeah.
For sure, yeah.
So is your favorite thing the end result, or is it that process that you take to get there?
I mean, for me, it's the process, and I think the finished result is a byproduct of that joy and that pursuit. And you know, to me, I really, I'm happy with the way it turns out at the end. And if I'm happy with it, it just speaks to me, and you know, it's great. So
Nice byproduct.
thank you, sir.
Yeah, I had a question about some of your pieces that are the screen printed ones. There's like elements of photography that are printed back into it or layered within. Is that specific to locations, or is this source material that's for that place that you've created, or where does that the photo imagery come from?
It's definitely photos that I've taken. You know, like part of my process, I just have always been a collector of things, but I also hate things, like really annoying. But I end up having like lots of drawings and scraps and fragments of things. I'm always like, if I see a really cool shape that I'm walking by, I'll photograph it. Or like my photos on my phone are all like weird shapes and trees and like cracks
Sidewalk
and
stuff, and yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my
and then
gosh.
like there's my cat, and then there's a bunch of other stuff. And then, but the photos end up being like places I've been, and like there's like rock formations or things that make sense with that piece, but they're not necessarily like made for that piece. But I think it's like for me it's valuable that it's a place that I've been, because like ultimately like the works are lots of different things. Like to me, like when I'm asked what's this work about, it's like I'll give you description from that day. It's like they change for me. So like their diaries, their like aspirations, or like their ideals of what I want, or like, you know, they're all kinds of different things. So
I was going to say, actually, and I'm so glad you said that because I was thinking it, but there's something like they're keeping a record, and it's like both of you, and I don't know what it is, but it seems like they're keeping a record of something that happened, but now it's like done and it's still and it's quiet. And that's just like what they both do for me in very different ways. So I wasn't sure if that was something that like you consciously thought about while you were doing it too, like keeping a diary.
I don't, like, I would say for myself, I don't know that it's a conscious thing. It's kind of like when I look back at the work, it's like, oh, you know, like with this piece, this pattern was my pillowcase, you know? So like that piece like takes on like a different meaning when that's like, you know, part of that. And so.
And for me, it's just a record of a particular afternoon or evening or a morning that I sat down and created this. And I react a lot to the seasons and a lot to the things that are going on around me. And a lot of the work I feel like reflects the energies that I currently have, whether it's stress or if it's calm or if it's or, you know, just kind of lull and quiet. These are kind of more of an accumulation of material that I think speak to a period of time as far as like encapsulating things. And this particular piece and the one back there are very much just about layering and layering paper on top and material, paint, drawing. So it kind of is like an encapsulation of a longer duration of time. Whereas these are more of like, they're definitely, I'd imagine years from now, I'll reflect on these and say, I remember where I was living at the time and what was going on in the world. And but yeah, it's definitely captures a moment. So.
But I mean, I like what you say there about like how there's histories in them, and then they're
Yeah.
sealed. I often believe that for people who make anything, artists, you know, I mean, anybody who makes anything, I feel like when you finish the thing, you yourself can look back at it and recall what it was like to make it. You remember all the little things that you were thinking about as you're making it. I do believe that like really process heavy works, particularly those that kind of edge into abstraction, seem to hang on to that history and wear it on the surface a little bit more, because there's not always something like that you can grab onto, and like your brain says, oh, I know what that is. So like you start to pay attention to the sensitivity of mark or pressure, and that's when you get behind the artist's hand almost, and you can almost imagine what it's like to make those marks, and the sound that it makes when you, like the sounds of the press when you get to the end, you know, like what it's like when you peel that layer back, or Justin, like when you open up those papers and they're drying, kind of like brittle leaves. I feel like abstraction tends to bring that up to the surface. And Becky, like for yours being as representational as they are, they're still extremely abstract. There's like a noise and a chaos, and then somehow it's balanced with a quiet. And I think largely that's due to the negative space you're including around your pieces, but there's this kind of sense of magical realism to them, where it's like you can grab onto something in it, but it's so kind of fantastic that you can't. And then you kind of fall back on what do you see, and then you get lost in process. I feel like that's where the history comes back. So I like that you arrived at that. That's really cool.
They have like, it's almost like I'm looking at like relics from like a post-apocalyptic, like after something happened, like the remnants of of human presence and like what is left after, you know what I mean?
That's not too unlike the last couple of years.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to show with you, Becky, and I have always really admired your work and just the precision, the technique, the thoughtfulness that goes into it, the intricacies, and just the imagination in the process. So I feel really lucky to be able to exhibit with you. So.
Yeah, we're lucky to have the both of you. And I mean, you know, like it wouldn't be hard to make a pretty complex web of how we all know each other in the room. And
It's very simple.
And I think just the fact that we can have this artist talk, and we have the turnout that we do, and have the people around us, and yeah, from nowhere. But like, there's these connections that we have with one another, and I think it's really great that we can share it. And I feel that's what like a really great exhibition does. It brings you in and makes you part of it, rather than just like keeps you at arm's distance and just as a reviewer. It brings you in.
I'd love to just mention the curation process and what that was like, because it was really enjoying working with you, Matt and Nicole, and just like we took the work from the back room and laid it down on the wall, and I've never been part of a show where things just voila, and the way it did. And it was 15 minutes the show was laid out the way it is right now. It just, and everybody agreed on everything. Like there was no like,
We all kind of.
there was no like, there was all like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Or
yeah,
how about
perfect,
this?
that's
I'm
cool.
like, okay.
And then maybe an hour and a half later, we had the majority of the wall hung, and then it was like, okay. Justin came in the next morning, and I was finishing up the back.
Yeah, he was like, he was like. But it was just, I mean, yeah, I drove home, I got out of the car and I looked at Instagram like a few minutes later, and there was
It was
like
already
an in
there.
process image. He was halfway through, and I was like, what?
It works when it's there. I mean, you guys make it really easy.
And just the vision, like that happened, and it just all came together.
It was collective. It was all
Yeah,
collective.
I mean, I'll say, you know, I didn't this isn't what I anticipated for a show, you know, in my head, I was like, oh, 2-person show, okay, here's Justin, here's my work. The way that it is flowing together is making me think about the work differently, so I think that's really exciting. So it's fun to like continue learning and exploring your work and like as you see it together, so.
That's great.
And it's awesome to be able to talk to different people about, like, Josias Figueroa was here last month, and he was really drawing comparisons between textures.
Mhm.
And I was like, there's been so much talk about structure and mark making and color, but he was picking up on textures, and he was really focusing in on, you know, how this could be like a small sample of what's going on right there. And I was like,
That's great.
This could be sad though, when you have to take that home and you don't have Justin's work to balance
I
it
know,
out.
right?
Right, and you say, why did I think this was so good?
Collaboration.
I don't know.
A bunch of widowed artworks.
Well, guys, do we have any other questions for Becky or Justin?
How much of the view are you thinking about when it comes to these pieces? Like, I think about just edge tension and entering the piece, and how, Becky, with your pieces, you use negative space in such a way where there's areas where I can dive in, and then Justin, you push your medium to the boundary and make me think about this as just this object. So I step back from afar and I enter from the outside and focus in on those fibers. Like, I don't know, sometimes it's not important, you don't really care, you know, you make it for yourself, but do you think about areas where people can look in and enter?
I think about like what's here. I feel like I think about it as like a depiction of an object, maybe. So like having that space around it, it's almost like a model of a thing or an idea of a thing. So I definitely do think about that negative space around it, and it feeling the idea of motion and stillness are important in the work. And I think I don't know that I think specifically about like how will the viewer receive this. Like I can't think of moments I do, but I always do because I talk to my students about this stuff all the time, so it's there. I definitely think about the pieces as like models of things, or like mapping has always been something I think about. So it's like information, but like a model of a form, so.
I think for me, I definitely make design choices, but sometimes those choices are, you know, what paper, what color am I gonna be dyeing these, or what material am I gonna be drawing with, or, you know, I never really name my works. I name the series, but I don't like the idea, with abstract work for me, I don't like to say this painting is called Sunset on Jupiter or something like that, because you're gonna be like, where is that? You know, I'm looking for that. So for me, it's untitled, and I like to, once again, give the viewer an opportunity to kind of see and then will search for themselves. And I don't necessarily think, I mean, like I said, I think there's a lot of design choices that go in all throughout. So, yeah, I definitely, I don't know how much of the viewer I have in mind when I'm actually making them, but I just follow design instincts.
But you're giving them the opportunity to, you're thinking about them in the fact that, you know, as you said, you're not naming the piece, but you're naming the series. You're still giving them space to be able to come to it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Great.
It kind of borders on a question that I was thinking about, but because Becky, yours do seem like you were talking about them being objects and you are looking from the outside at something. And then Justin, yours are almost like you kind of can exist inside because they hit the whole border and you're able to kind of pass it. But then you both kind of deal with these obstructions that allow entry or not.
Yeah.
Like, you can't quite get inside your structures,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like,
It's
not
true.
really. And then
You're like an
you were
outsider.
almost, you're similar because you
Yeah.
come into the space, but then those lines are obstructions into, they're a constant reminder that you're like not quite able to
Yeah.
pass through. And I wonder if you all think about that at all, because it's a
I
way you're
think that
different
there's-
and the same at the same time.
It's interesting, cause I think these pieces speak more to like, there's some erasure in there, there's some like elimination and thinking about entries, like how I use paint in opaque fashion up here in certain areas, or big sheets of paper, to obscure things, or a line to pull you in a little bit. But like I look at this piece and I see this line here and just this blue here, and then below that, the blue there. To me, this draws me in. And it's not something I tried to do, it's just chance occurrences. But I decided to highlight that in my choices when I was, ceased mark making at this point and allowed these creases and these paint moments to kind of shine, resonate.
I like what you said about Justin's work being objects, and like thinking about my work as like ideas of objects. And I think that like objectivity is something that sort of relates between like the two ways of working.
Yeah, I would agree with that too.
Well, thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank
you guys. And let's hang out. There's some refreshments. Yeah.